Exodus chapter 6, we saw Jehovah tell Moses that he was going to be faithful to his covenant. We saw that a number of different ways, the words that were being used, connecting things back to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And that because of this, that God was going to be faithful to his covenant, he was going to force Pharaoh to send forth his people from Egypt. The command was for him to do this, but as we know, Pharaoh rejected and will continue to reject it as we go through the passage. So God will force Pharaoh to comply. Moses was to faithfully relay this message to Israel, that God was going to deliver his people, that he remembered the covenant that he had made. He saw their affliction. And so Moses, he did that. However, the people were not interested in listening to Moses anymore. They saw Moses working against the will of Jehovah because things had only gotten worse with Pharaoh since Moses and Aaron had approached them. Moses comes back to Jehovah and is told to deliver the same message to Pharaoh again. Moses expresses his hesitation because he does not think that Pharaoh is going to listen. Moses is correct, but that doesn't change anything. Jehovah still wants Moses to deliver this message. Moses has his message to both Israel and to Pharaoh, God says. He just needs to be faithful and consistently deliver it. Today we'll move into Exodus chapter 7. Moses will go back to Pharaoh and deliver the message again. Moses will not hesitate, and Aaron will go with him. Today we'll just focus on their next encounter with Pharaoh, where Moses and Aaron performs the miracle with his staff turning into a snake. And Pharaoh's magicians follow suit. We will see how this event further hardens Pharaoh's heart, setting the stage for yet another encounter, where we'll see the start of the 10 plagues. Pharaoh's heart will continue to harden until he can take no more, which is related to the 10th plague and the final plague. But today we'll just deal with the portion of the miracle performed before Pharaoh, where Jehovah begins to reveal himself to Pharaoh, where Pharaoh has said, "I do not know this Jehovah." Jehovah is going to make himself known to him. Let's go ahead and let's offer up a request unto God to ask him to help us with his time and to be glorified as well. Heavenly Father, and thank you for this day that you've given us this appointed time, this Sabbath, that we can come before you. Father, I do pray for those that are not able to be here today. Father, I pray for their safety. I pray that you bring them back again. Father, I just thank you for those that are able to be here today, though. Father, I pray that as we focus on the text of your word here now in this portion of the service, that you give us the understanding, especially as you move into the portion of Exodus of where your judgments begin to be poured out. Father, today we'll not see that, but Father, we will see you begin to reveal yourself through Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh and to the people of Egypt. Father, I pray that you give us clarity as we see your words here today, and that we would recognize what is going on here in the text, and that you be glorified because of that. I pray all this in Yeshua's name. Amen. Amen. All right, Exodus chapter 7 and verse 1, it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet." I think it's important to understand that the dialogue from chapter 6 continues into chapter 7. Jehovah, even with Moses' hesitation, continues to use Moses. Part of the reason for this, I believe, is found in chapter 6, which we focused on last week. Moses and his family line, were faithful. Not perfect, but still faithful. We see here in verse 1 how Jehovah gives Moses a reminder of what he had said to him earlier. This is what had been said in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 16. So briefly turn back there to Exodus 4:16. Let's remind ourselves of what had been said back here. Exodus 4:16, it says, "And he," that's referring to Aaron, "shall be thy spokesman unto the people, and he shall be, even he shall be to thee instead of a mouth, and thou shalt be to him instead of God." And so God had already related this truth to Moses back in Exodus chapter 6. We get to Exodus chapter 7, and it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet." Now, interestingly, In Exodus 4, when God relays this to him, it's connected to Moses' hesitation. We see here in Exodus chapter 6, Moses hesitating, and God saying, Moses, I put you in a position that you are going to be to Aaron, and here, as it says to Pharaoh, a God. And Aaron will be your spokesman. So Exodus chapter 7 and verse 1, it says, the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a God to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. And so the same thing is relayed. On one hand, one can easily ask, why does God keep repeating himself? Doesn't he already tell Moses this? A part of the answer is that the truth is established by one or two witnesses. And this is kind of a significant truth in this aspect of that really Moses is being viewed as God on earth. And that Aaron is his spokesman or the prophet. So it's established by a witness here. The other reason why I believe this shows up here is that, like us, Moses needed to hear the instruction again. I don't know about you, but many times God needs to slam me against the wall multiple times with truth before sometimes it sinks in. And Moses, I think, is like that. The God says, I need you to understand this, Moses. This is a significant truth that you're carrying out. This is not just a one-time thing. I'm telling you this. You need to connect the dots here and realize this is the thing that you're doing. Jehovah wants Moses to understand that this is a significant truth. And what is that? That Jehovah has placed Moses into a position to represent God to Pharaoh. He's in a position to represent God to Pharaoh. You see, Pharaoh doesn't hear God. Pharaoh doesn't see God other than what he's going to see for the miracles and such, but it is Moses that's going to represent God to Pharaoh. And for Aaron to be the one to deliver the message given to Moses to Pharaoh himself. So from Pharaoh's position, Moses is the one who is calling the shots. For what Pharaoh sees, Moses is the one declaring it. Moses is the one thinking these things, and Moses is the one that is causing this to happen. From Pharaoh's perspective, Moses is the one making the demands. And Moses is the one that issues forth judgment. It is Moses that has the ability to call off the judgments. You see, Pharaoh is interacting with Moses, ultimately. It is Moses that has the abilities above the gods of Egypt. It is Moses that needs to be listened to. And so, for all practical purposes, Moses is God before Pharaoh. Jehovah is not saying that Pharaoh would think that Moses is God. He will understand that Moses represents Jehovah. But from man's perspective, Moses is the one that has the authority. And it says Moses does not speak directly with Pharaoh, but rather through Aaron. Aaron ends up being like the prophet. Part of what Jehovah is saying to Moses is that it is important how he holds himself before Pharaoh. Part of what Jehovah is saying as well, though, is that Moses, needs to go to Pharaoh and deliver this message. So that Pharaoh understands that all of this that unfolds is from Jehovah. We'll move on to verse 2 here. Thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh that he send the children of Israel out of his land. So here we see that Jehovah has more things to tell Moses. He says Moses will speak all that he commands him. So again here in verse 2, thou shalt speak all that I command thee. In other words, he's saying, Moses, I would have more things to tell you. I've told you a certain amount of things, but I have more things to tell you that you need to do. And so Moses needs to speak all things commanded unto him. In other words, it will not be Moses that calls the shots ultimately. God is the one determining what and when things need to be done. And what and when something needs to be said. God's the one that tells Moses. Moses then relays this unto Aaron. Jehovah will relay this to Moses. Moses hears what God says, not Aaron. I think this is also an important thing to recognize. God is not speaking to Aaron. And I don't think Aaron hears everything. Notice the order of the text in verse 2. Thou shalt speak all that I command thee. And Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh that he should send forth the children of Israel out of his land. And so Moses needs to speak all that Jehovah commands. It says Moses is not speaking to Pharaoh. Who is Moses speaking to? The answer is he's speaking to Aaron. So again, verse 2. Thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron and thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh. You see, if Aaron was hearing everything, why would Moses need to tell Aaron to do something? The answer is because Aaron doesn't hear everything. So Moses needs to be faithful in relaying unto Aaron so that Aaron can then deliver those words or do those actions before Pharaoh. So this tells us that Aaron does not hear necessarily everything speaking to Moses. If he did, there'd be no reason for Moses to speak to Aaron what was commanded. So Moses needs to be faithful in relaying to Aaron what Jehovah has commanded. And what is that which is to be spoken? Well, the starting message is this, that Pharaoh needs to send the children of Israel out of his land. So you see that here in verse 2. He says, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh that he should send the children of Israel out of his land. That is the message. And this is what we've seen earlier already, and the emphasis that God has been telling Moses. Moving on to verse 3. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. So here we see the words that become a continual theme throughout Jehovah's interaction with Pharaoh. When we look at this verse, it's important to notice there are two clauses. So we have two halves of the verse. It says, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart. So this is what we see over and over again. It says, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. So we have two different clauses here. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and second, multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. Now, both clauses have their own verbs. The first one is easy to see. In the first half of the first clause, it says, I will harden. So I will harden is one of those verbs. In the second clause, we have the verb multiply. You could translate this literally, I will multiply. So you could walk away here and you could say, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and I will multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. That's a valid rendering of that verse. The two phrases, though, are separated by the word and in the English. Or in the wow, the Hebrew letter wow, which is a conjunction. And so there's many ways to understand this wow conjunction here. The way that is natural for us to normally understand the structure in the English is to view both clauses independently. In other words, you have two things that are being said here. That Jehovah is doing two separate things. One, he is going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And two, or second of all, that he is going to multiply his signs and his wonders. Now recognize that if we understand it that way, that you kind of start getting this idea that God's doing two things. One, he is hardening. And number two, that he's multiplying his signs and wonders. However, also recognize this. It's also common for the wow conjunction to also operate as an intensifier or an explanation. In other words, the verse can be read with the understanding of, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, I will even multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. Realize that sounds a little bit different, doesn't it? So we have here in the English translation, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. Or you could translate this, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, I will even multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. There's a nuance there in how you understand that. Or another way you can understand this, translate this, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and indeed I will multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. Do you see the difference there? Those that take a Calvinistic approach would view the hardening as God's reaching in and manipulating Pharaoh's heart. But as we go through these passages here, we will find that it is not God that is manipulating his heart. God is not reaching in and turning screws or adjusting things so that Pharaoh goes a certain direction. Rather, it is God doing these signs and wonders through Moses and Aaron. And those signs and wonders that end up hardening Pharaoh's heart is what happens. Is God uses these signs and wonders, and Pharaoh's heart is hardened in the process. So that understanding comes across in the Hebrew. It's just how you translate this. And so you can understand this text of, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and indeed I will multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. In other words, that his heart is hardened through these signs and these wonders. That he's explaining how he's going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Jehovah is trying to tell Moses here in verse 3, be prepared, Moses. These signs and wonders will not convince Pharaoh. Rather, these signs will further push Pharaoh away, is what is being said. Verse 4 continues. But Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt, and bring forth my armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgment. So you might be saying, wait a second, when we get to verse 4, it sure sounds like it says that Pharaoh is responding. That Pharaoh will not hearken unto you, but he will not hearken unto you. He says, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt. The English reads here in a way that almost sounds like God is doing that so he can purposely judge Egypt. That's the way the English reads here. Again, so let me read verses 3 and 4 here to combine. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in Egypt, but Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt. It's almost like, sounds like here in the English, that God is saying, I'm going to do this so that I can judge Egypt. And so just like when you look at verse 3, there's a couple ways to understand this. And the text seems to here point towards almost like a Calvinistic interpretation. Now, when we get to verse 4, the translators have chosen to translate the wow disjunctive as the word but. So that's a translation choice. However, it could just as easily be understood as a parenthetical thought explaining the previous thought. That's what a disjunctive often does. In other words, verse 4 begins with helping to explain what is going on here in verse 3. So in other words, and Pharaoh will not hearken unto you. So in other words, it's explaining. However, it could be understood as this. In other words, even though Jehovah will show his signs and his wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen. He'll still not listen. Even though God is showing the signs and his wonders, he's not going to listen to him. So by the way, I'm going to show these signs and wonders. He's going to harden his heart, and he's not going to listen to you. I feel like the translation here has made choices that leans towards a Calvinistic interpretation. But realize this is not how you can understand this. Even the next phrase, when it says that I may lay my hands upon Egypt. In the Hebrew, it simply reads, and I will set my hand upon Egypt. That's all it reads. The words may and that I may is not found in the Hebrew. It's kind of like the translators have added this in a way and reading into the translation. The English, that I may, is not demanded by the simple wow conjunction. It's an interpretational translation. A wooden translation, understanding the first wow disjunctive as a parenthetical, reads, even Pharaoh shall not listen to you, and I will set my hand upon Egypt. So he's saying, I'm still going to move forward with this, even though I know this. And so this idea of I have to do this, or this is why I'm doing it, is not demanded by the Hebrew. And so I do not like doing this, as this can lead individuals to doubt the text. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But this is where understanding of the languages makes a big difference. And I am no means an expert here, but I do know enough to know there is some interpretation going on here in the translation. An interpretation that leans towards a Calvinistic understanding of the passage. Especially when you go back to Exodus chapter 9, which we dealt with in the second service when we were comparing what was being said by Paul in Romans 9. And so it's very clear that God is doing things and Pharaoh is responding to those miracles, those signs and those wonders, just like we have here in Exodus 7 and verse 3 when it says, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Indeed, I will multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. And so the idea here is that God is going to harden through these signs and these wonders. He's going to multiply. So I believe that Jehovah is just helping Moses understand that Pharaoh is not going to listen, no matter what miracles are done. That as he does these signs and these wonders, he multiplies them, Pharaoh's not going to listen. Pharaoh's just going to harden his heart. And God is doing this knowing that it's going to harden his heart. Because God is still going to judge Egypt accordingly. And he will bring forth his people out of Egypt with these great judgments. And that's what he's saying here in verse 4. He says, but Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt, and I will bring and it says, and bring forth mine armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. God says, I'm still going to set my hand against Egypt, even though Pharaoh doesn't listen, even though I know he's going to respond this way, because I'm going to bring forth my people out of the land of Egypt. God doesn't say, okay, well, I know Pharaoh's not going to listen to me, and therefore I'm not going to put him in harm's way. And the reason is, God says, is because I need to bring my people out. So if Pharaoh's going to choose to go against me, I'm still going to accomplish my redemption. And so God says, I'm not going to have mercy upon Pharaoh at the expense of my people. Now, an interesting thing in this verse is the reference to the armies being brought out in parallel with his people. So again, verse 4, it says, and bring forth mine armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgment. Realize that the word and is in italics. It doesn't exist in the Hebrew. So it says, literally, and bring forth mine armies, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. So God says that another word for his people is armies. This is a foreshadowing of how God is going to use his people to bring about change. This is an allusion to the conquering of the land of Canaan. You see, God is already looking ahead. How is he going to cause his people to inherit the land of Canaan? By bringing forth his armies out of Egypt. Verse 5. And the Egyptians shall know that I am Jehovah, I am the Lord, that I stretched forth mine hand upon Egypt, and bring out the children of Israel from among them. See, here Jehovah helps Moses understand that the end result of all of this. Yes, Jehovah will judge Egypt. Yes, Israel will be set free. But also equally important is that the Egyptians will know who Jehovah is. Again, let me read that verse. It says, and the Egyptians shall know that I am Jehovah, when I stretch forth my hand upon Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them. So God says that they will know, the Egyptians will know that he is Jehovah when they see these things happen, when the judgments occur, when the Egyptians see the Israelites leave Egypt. They will know because of the judgments. They will know because Israel has been released. All of this is significant because all other gods, their so-called blessings and so-called cursings that they believe come from their false gods, are only assumed to have come from them. None of the false gods have ever spoken or revealed truth. Think about that for a moment. All the false gods that exist out there, people just say, well, this piece of stone or this animal, this is a god. And that blessings happen because I reverence the cow or whatever it might be. I reverence the eagle, or I disrespected that, and so therefore I haven't offered a grain offering to whatever animal it might be, or false god. That's why cursings have happened to us. Well, these false gods have never spoken to these people. See, what's different here is that Jehovah has declared through Moses and Aaron what is going to happen. And so these people, they're going to see judgments occur, but not just judgments randomly. They're going to see judgments occur after they've rejected truth. After Jehovah has said, I'm going to cause this to happen for you rebelling against me, and then the judgments happen. And then Jehovah says, tell me when you want it to stop. And they say then, and then it stops. So Jehovah's complete control of when things start, when they end, and at the end of the day, God says, I want my people to be leaving, and they're going to leave. And so you see, Jehovah has declared himself in what he demands. Jehovah has declared the consequences. And then they happen exactly as they were prophesied. You see, they're going to find out, the Egyptians, that Jehovah is the only God that exists. All the other gods are false gods. And they've only assumed that blessings come from these false gods. They've only assumed that bad things have come from these gods when they've only just wrongly assigned them. The Egyptians shall know that he is Jehovah. And so we see the results of what God says is going to happen from this. At the end of the day, they will know that he is Jehovah. Verse 6 and verse 7 here. And Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them, so did they. And Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old, when they spake unto Pharaoh. So here we see the obedience of both Moses and Aaron. We can also see in verse 7 the ages of both men. Moses was 80 and Aaron was 83. Now, on one hand, This is a timestamp. It helps us understand when these events happen. It helps us understand Moses and Aaron relationship, that Aaron was 3 years older than him. It helps us understand this is 40 years after Moses had fled into the land of Midian. But on the other, this also shows something significant. It shows the prominence between these two men. Look back at the text here again, verses 6 and 7. And Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them, so did they. And Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old, when they spake unto Pharaoh. Do you notice anything unusual there? The thing that's unusual is that Moses is listed first. Normally, the elder should be listed first. However, this is not the case. Even though Aaron is older than Moses, Moses is listed first in both verses 6 and verse 7, in their obedience as well as in their ages. This places an emphasis of importance upon Moses. It is Jehovah saying, Moses is my primary man and Aaron second. And this also goes along with the line of Aaron is the prophet for Moses, and Moses acts as the God before Pharaoh and the God before Aaron. So we see this emphasis in the text here on the prominence of Moses. Verse 8. And the Lord spake unto Moses and said and unto Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, Show a miracle for you, then ye shall say unto Aaron, Take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. Now, over the next several verses, Moses and Aaron are going to stand before Pharaoh again. Aaron will again declare to Pharaoh, Send forth the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Now, why do we know this? It's not said here in the text. Well, the reason is because we saw just earlier in the passage we were reading that this was already said, that God said you're going to say this before him. So Moses and Aaron are going to go before Pharaoh, and Aaron is going to declare, Send forth my people Israel out from the land. So they maybe go worship Jehovah. Jehovah tells Moses and Aaron here that Pharaoh is going to ask them for a miracle. In other words, Pharaoh is going to ask for proof that they have divine authority to make such a demand to let Israel go. So they're going to say these words, and God says what Pharaoh is going to respond to you with this is he's going to say, Show me a miracle. Prove to me that your words have authority. Prove to me that your God is trying to tell you this. Keep in mind, this has not happened yet. God is telling Moses and Aaron that you're going to come before Pharaoh, and he's going to say, Show me a sign. Show me a miracle. Prove to me. See, Jehovah is speaking prophetically here. This will be further proof to Moses and to Aaron that Jehovah is in complete control. He knows exactly what's going to happen. Jehovah tells them that when Pharaoh makes this request to show me a sign, show me a miracle, that they are to perform the sign that Moses and Aaron had already performed before Israel. Aaron will take the staff of God and throw it on the ground in front of Pharaoh. When he does this, it becomes a serpent. Now, we've already been through the symbolism here already in earlier passages. And so I'm not going to go over that again, but realize, so this is none of this is a surprise. This miracle has already been demonstrated. Moses would know exactly what he's supposed to do before Pharaoh, what Aaron was supposed to do, because God's already explained this, and they've already done it before Israel. Verse 10. And Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh. So again, they haven't been there, that God has spoken everything prophetically here. And they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. So here we see that everything unfolded as Jehovah had prophesied. And most importantly, as the text records, they did so as Jehovah had commanded. Moses and Aaron were faithful to Jehovah's commandments. And the miracle transpired as Jehovah said it would. He said, Tell Aaron at that point then, cast down your rod, and it'll turn into a serpent. And that's exactly what happened. God enabled the miracle to happen. It wasn't Moses, it wasn't Aaron that turned that rod into a serpent or a snake. It was God that did that. They were faithful and obedient in following God's commandments. Before Pharaoh sees Moses instruct Aaron to do something. Aaron then throws down his rod, and it turns into a snake. Verse 11. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, now the magicians of Egypt. They also did in like manner with their enchantments. Now after Aaron cast down the staff of God, Pharaoh calls in his wise men and his sorcerers. The previous verse had already said that his servants were there, so a number of people were already there. But his wise men and his sorcerers were not. These would have been Pharaoh's trusted men. The wise men, ones that have been learned and would have been able to give him counsel. The sorcerers would have been the magicians, individuals connected to the religious system in various forms. Now it's important to see both groups here at this point, because both of them, I believe, play a role in what transpires in the second half of the verse. Again, verse 11. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers. Now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments. I believe these wise men and the sorcerers got together and determined what their next step was going to be. So it's important to see both groups here, as they may have even been working together. The text seems to give the impression that these men would have been called before Pharaoh, and they would have assessed the situation. They would have seen the snake on the ground that Aaron had turned into a snake. Now it's probable that Aaron would have grabbed the serpent by its tail and turned it back into the rod of God. And then did the miracle again so the wise men and sorcerers could have seen it firsthand. And so since they did the exact same thing, and it almost seems like the text is trying to tell us that Aaron would have done it a couple times here before them, so they would have been very clear in understanding what happened. I imagine that the wise men and the sorcerers huddled together after seeing the miracle to consult what and how to proceed. We see the result in the second half of verse 11, where it says that they also did in like manner their enchantments. And so we see that before the eyes of all that were present, they duplicated the miracle. That Aaron took the rod, threw it down, and turned it into a serpent. And then the sorcerers, the magicians, duplicated it. They did the same thing before everybody that was there. Most importantly, Pharaoh and his servants. Now, at first, this seems odd. After all, wasn't this a miracle from Jehovah? How would man be able to duplicate a miracle? Sit back and think about this a minute. What's going on here? Because wasn't it supposed to be something special that proved that Jehovah was with Moses and Aaron? Even if these sorcerers were connected with the demonic realm, and they're praying to these demons or whatever it might be, how is it that they could do this sort of a miracle? Turning a stick, a dead object, into a living snake. Step back and think about this. Can the demonic realm do such a thing? I don't think it can. So that does this, or would this belittle the miracle from God? And the answer is yes, it would. And is part of the reason we see Pharaoh's response in the following verses, which we'll get to momentarily. But let me help you see something that is obscured a bit by the English. That word enchantment is a good translation and a valid translation. But the underlying Hebrew word is the word lahat, which comes from the word lahat, which means to burn or to blaze or to set on fire. Step back for a moment and think about that. That's an interesting word to use here. The noun found in our passage appears one other place, and that's in Genesis 3:24. Turn back with me there. In Genesis 3:24. So we're at the end of Genesis chapter 3. When you think of Genesis chapter 3, the first thing you think of is Adam and Eve in the garden and the serpent. That's the first thing you should think about. And then how they sinned and they run from it, God confronts them. And at the very end here, it says, so he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. Now, the word behind flaming is the exact same word translated as enchantments in Exodus chapter 7. So in other words, let me go back here and read the verse that we were just focusing on here, verse 11. It says at the end of it, "Now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments," or with their flames. That's what it says here in the Hebrew, literally. And so enchantments is, like I said, a reasonable translation because they were doing something and it caused this to happen. But they did the exact same thing. They turned rods or staffs into snakes with their flames. And so when this is used in the verb form, it always shows up as this idea of something burning, blazing, or set on fire. So what does this tell us about the word translated as enchantment in Exodus chapter 7? This is the only time this word is translated this way. It tells us that what they were doing involved fire. Now, can you think of anything today, especially when musicians are involved, that has fire? Think about that for a moment. Magicians are all about what? Smoke and mirrors. Distractions. Using something to divert attention while some sleight of hand is done. That's what magicians do. And so this is what's being described here. I mean, you can think about, I'm sure not all of our kids have seen magicians and stuff like that, but typically you have like either hocus pocus or whatever, they do something and poof, something happens and something changes from one thing to the next. The rabbit comes out of the hat or whatever it is, right? So that's what we have going on here. These magicians were not demonstrating real power, as in the form of a miracle. Rather, they were impersonating a miracle with sleight of hand. Everyone saw a flame, and then all of a sudden the rods became snakes. To the onlookers, the sorcerers had duplicated the miracle. In other words, the sorcerers were trying to say there was nothing really special about what Moses and Aaron had done. And so we see here again this verse. It says, "Now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their flames," with their enchantments. You see, Moses and Aaron, there was no flames there. He threw the rod of God on the ground, and it turned into a snake. The magicians, they threw the rod down, and poof, flames appear, and all of a sudden it turns into a snake. Something happened. And so just realize it doesn't say they did the miracle. It says that let me read the verse here again. It says they did in like manner with their enchantments. What did they do in like manners? Here you see a rod, now you see a snake. That's what they did with their enchantments, with their flame. And so I think it's interesting to understand here, this does not take away from the power of God. This is not saying demons have the ability to take non-life and turn it into life. That's not what they have the ability to do. Verse 12. It says, "For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods." See, here we see the emphasis that the magician's rods became serpents like Aaron's. However, something significant happens after this. Aaron's rod swallowed their rods. Now, what this is saying is that Aaron's rod, that had become a snake, it swallowed up the rods of the Egyptians that had become snakes. Now, what does this show? It clearly shows that Aaron's rod was more powerful than the sorcerer's rods. That man can try to copy God, even if demonic forces are involved somehow, but in the end, it is Jehovah that is most powerful. He is the most powerful. So even if you want to walk away from the text and you want to say, well, that they did truly turn their rods into a snake, into snakes in plural, at the end of the day, even if it's demonic forces, God is more superior than anything else that can match it, and try to match it, that can try to copy it. Jehovah is the most powerful. I believe it's important to see the text refers to it as Aaron's rod here, rather than Aaron's snake as well. I think it's interesting because in the verse 12 it says, "But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods." That is because I believe this is the staff of God that is behind all of this. not the serpent of God that is behind all of this. You have to imagine that when this happened, everyone gasped at this point, seeing what just unfolded. It was clear whose miracle was more powerful. However, notice verse 13. This is where we'll end today. Verse 13. And he hardened Pharaoh's heart, that he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. After everything that unfolded, we see the testimony that hardened Pharaoh's heart. The textual flow shows us the order. God sends Moses and Aaron before Pharaoh. Moses and Aaron do a miracle. Although it is copied, Jehovah is still shown as being superior. When we see the conclusion, Jehovah has hardened Pharaoh's heart. The hardening is connected to the signs and to the wonders. And because Pharaoh's heart is hardened, he will not hearken or listen unto the words of Moses and Aaron. What words? The command of send forth my people Israel from the land of Egypt. Now, as we step back briefly, it's important to recognize that Pharaoh had a choice. Does he listen to Jehovah or not? Remember his previous claim that we saw back in Exodus chapter 5. Go back to Exodus chapter 5 and verse 2. And Pharaoh said, who is Jehovah, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not Jehovah, neither will I let Israel go. Pharaoh said he did not know Jehovah. Well, now, after this first miracle, Pharaoh is without excuse. He now knows the power and the existence of Jehovah. Even if he's fooled by his sorcerers that a miracle can be done by them, a similar miracle, even if he thinks that, he saw that, it is evident with Aaron's rod swallowing up all their rods, not just one rod. It wasn't just one snake versus another snake. It was one snake versus a multitude of snakes. All of them were swallowed. It is clear that Jehovah was the most powerful. So even if Pharaoh believed that his men could do miracles through divine power, what was clear was that Jehovah's divinity was more powerful than what they had. He was the most powerful God. Even if they had the misunderstanding there were multiple gods, he was the one in charge. In other words, Pharaoh had no legitimate excuse, because he would have recognized right there that this was the most powerful God. And so the most powerful God is telling your gods that you're over you need to let these people go. Well, you need to listen to the most powerful God. And so Pharaoh was without excuse. He had a choice. He rejected that. Pharaoh has no legitimate excuse. He chooses to reject the revelation, the direct revelation from Jehovah. And because of this, the next thing we will see is the beginning of the plagues. The order here is important. Jehovah revealed himself to Pharaoh and his servants not with judgments, but with a miracle that harmed no one. He says, I am Jehovah, listen to me. I'm proving to you. He's not coming down and saying, boom, I hate you. Boom, I'm going to judge you, even though you deserve it. He says, this is who I am. I'm showing you more powerful than anything else here. Listen to me. Pharaoh and his servants reject that. And now the plagues start. Now the judgments start. So the miracle harmed no one, other than maybe the pride of the sorcerers. Jehovah in his mercy revealed himself to Pharaoh. Pharaoh in his stubbornness rejects the reality of Jehovah. He's without excuse. Let's go ahead and let's pray. Heavenly Father,